Hey, it's Brooks with Character Design Forge, and today we are wading into something that some would call a controversial subject. When we design characters, a lot of people try too early to start establishing turnarounds, lineups of characters, really the finalizing steps of the process before exploring the character through iteration. And one of the best ways to do that with certain kinds of characters is through exploring expressions. Now, not only does this help you understand whether or not a character is capable of opening their mouth a certain amount or emoting with their eyes, it can help you refine the shapes and optimize the character. In this video, we'll use one of the Caterpillar animated series designs that we were sketching during Lightbox as we talk about controversy. For some reason. Now, forgive this rabbit hole, but it is going somewhere. There's two concepts in animation that often get applied to character designs simply through them working well together: squash and stretch, and exaggeration. Squash and stretch is when force, energy, gravity makes a shape malleable and changeable instead of rigid. Exaggeration is present in practically any stylized or representative storytelling because it can help emphasize and make things larger than life, which is a lot of what animation's about. Some animation allows easily for squash and stretch. Some of it is animated more fluidly. Through the use of smears or exaggerated in-between frames, a character like Aladdin looks livelier in motion. You probably wouldn't expect much squash and stretch from a more limited animation in a more rigid style like an anime, but it still happens, and of course exaggerated expressions are very present in that media. So I am going to submit another word to go along with these things: elasticity. And this isn't so much about the actual stretchiness of the literal character or their shapes, but about how much we easily believe big changes in their shapes because of abstraction. Don't worry, I'll make it make sense. This, for instance, is a real caterpillar. This, for instance, is a quote-unquote real lion. And this is a quote-unquote real mad titan. Applying almost any amount of squash and stretch to these character shapes will break them, both literally and breaking our suspension of disbelief that this is real and not a CGI fabrication. I'm looking at you, real caterpillar. Aladdin, several steps removed from realism, has more elasticity, the term that I'm coming up with right now, because you can have the character's jaw stretch out as he moves. You can have features on the face move around the face slightly, and our suspension of disbelief isn't broken. Despite being a normal human character, this stylized design is more abstract than a realistic one, so there's more room to play with. Now, once you move into territory that isn't even feature animation, but the camp that is firmly cartoons, with a capital C, you have the most elasticity. You can have heads blow up to twice the size while a character is yelling. You can have the eyes move apart and towards each other, and we're there for it. It doesn't ruin anything for us. It adds to that vibe, and we kind of expect it. That's where we're at with this caterpillar and the style that we're working in. I am working on an animated pilot called Stormfellers, which uses 3D models and hand-drawn expressions, where there's some amount of elasticity, but most of the animation happens with relatively rigid 3D models. The style of this caterpillar, however, is closer to something like a series animation from Cartoon Network or the like, a mix of rigged 2D puppets and hand-drawn animation. And this is the place where our controversy comes up. A lot of us have started seeing a growing number of people decrying animation that goes off model. That model in question would be something like the character sheet or the standard look of a character. Shots or even individual frames where a character's proportions are different or a face is drawn in a funny way. So what's the motive behind this criticism? Well, sort of the same as a lot of other stuff. Some of it is it just bothers people, they don't like it personally. Some of it is supposed to fit the narrative that it makes for an inferior product or that the showmakers are lazy, which animation being the process that it is to consider any aspect of the tight production schedules and intensive work lazy would be like saying that a marathon runner is lazy for wearing nice shoes or not going faster. To maybe help give some perspective with an insight on the process, a lot of shows are being drawn quickly by storyboard artists first. Instead of making final animation, they're responsible for simply making a rough draft of what the show will eventually look like from shot to shot, a little bit of camera direction, things like that. Board artists have a very tight and economical style, Really, as long as the action is clear, a board artist has done their job. A lot of times, boarders give exaggerated expressions to characters who aren't remotely drawn on model, and this is a strength and not at all a detractor. It leads to those larger-than-life, often really funny expressions that get merged with a more final drawing later in the production process. Speaking of elasticity in a more literal term, Adventure Time was an almost exclusively hand-drawn production, which meant that stylistic differences exist between the way that one board artist draws a character from another board artist. This can be seen in the way that Jake the dog, a literal stretchy dog in terms of elasticity, will look slightly different and from season to season depending on who's drawing him, and of course on the actual shapes that he's making. Now, to me, this serves to strengthen the storytelling. The character can serve a different role and have a look that reinforces that role in a given story. Is Jake supremely lazy today? Is he just vibing? Is he a serene mentor to Finn? Is he experiencing some kind of epiphany or deep change? Is he just a big goof or the main character of an episode? It can all change. Of course, that doesn't mean that Adventure Time lacks model sheets. In fact, there's even guides like these sheets that show do's and don'ts in order to maintain a consistent style across the characters, and certain rules that shouldn't be broken when animating them. And you might be saying, well, Jake is a literal elastic dog. I'm okay with him going off model. I don't like it when other characters do it. Fair enough. Speaking of in-between frames and smears, some folks will pause and capture these frames and make fun of them as though this isn't exactly what a frame needed to look like to serve a richer, livelier animation. So here's just a tiny test for you that you can do right now. I like to joke with friends that pausing my face at any point in a video, which is live action, gives you a really dumb looking face. And the reason being that I'm not posing like a model for an ad, I'm talking and emoting on a video, but the individual frames look really goofy. Now, film yourself on your camera and pause at any point, and you'll probably get the same experience. That's what's happening with animation. Its primary purpose isn't to be paused, it's to be looked at in a sequence. It might surprise you, though, that this video isn't about convincing people that don't like off-model drawings of anything otherwise. In fact, like everything else on this channel, this is meant to help people who are learning or artists to improve. A consequence of seeing a lot of discourse and even vitriol and hatred directed toward off-model drawings might be for an artist to calcify or start inhibiting their own flow, energy, gesture, and movement in their drawings, erring on the side of being on model, sometimes done all too quickly early on in the process without continuing to develop and explore the shapes and ideas of the character or iterating on the character. Even the simple act of drawing a couple of different expressions for this simple caterpillar design helps me re-understand the shapes and solidify a better idea of the character as I go. There's always plenty of time later on to create that precise model sheet with your final version of the character, but that point doesn't need to be rushed to. So let's test out some of this squash and stretch with our caterpillar. We could turn their head by simply drawing these key frames where the face turns in one direction, or in the middle, we could add an arcing overshoot motion, which is much more lively and interesting. Now, because our caterpillar is so abstract compared to the real thing, we get away with a ton of elasticity, and we can get a character who can emote and do goofy things without us going, that's weird, its eyes just got bigger. This is directly related to how abstract our character is. Huckleberry Hound and Yogi in Jellystone are not literal dogs and bears. We are okay with the shapes being representative of something, and our suspension of disbelief accepts any inconsistencies more graciously. Now, I won't defend anyone that complains about something going off model, but perhaps their sense of elasticity is simply different. They expect or hold to a standard a show like Steven Universe to maintain a level of realism that exceeds what the show actually is. Maybe they aren't aware of the production realities that no one person is responsible for every drawing. Whatever their reason is, in your own practice, don't let the stigma of being off-model force you to be overly worried about consistency in your drawings. Now, there is absolutely some nuance there. Being able to redraw something consistently comes with a certain level of drawing understanding and experience. The more realism that your drawing is representing, the less wiggle room that you have for exaggeration. All that being said, some really appealing and engaging work comes from using these principles in your art. And as we've been showing with our caterpillar, it starts in the design process. I personally like to create characters that are simpler and more elastic to allow for this amount of squash and stretch and exaggeration. Think about the purpose, which we talk about constantly, of your character when designing. If it's going to move and act or emote like a comic or animation, design for movement and emotion. Build that wiggle room in the same way that a puppet builder builds a functional mouth or set of eyebrows. All of our exploration of how far we could push the shapes through expressions at the beginning and refining those shapes lead to a character that served the purpose better. Yes, there are definitely animation mistakes that have been made out there, and there's characters that are being pushed in their elasticity further than maybe they should be. But I think all in all, I'd rather have more exaggerated squash and stretchy characters for more livelier animation and storytelling than to be strictly adhering to something that never changes shape at all. There's a stiffness and rigidity in a still image that a lot of animators are actively working to get rid of, to convey the illusion of life that comes from animation. So I think that doing things that reintroduce the stiffness just is counterintuitive. How do you feel about characters that go off model? And as an extra challenge, can you make your comment without saying CalArt style? For bonus points. I hope that if nothing else, this video gives you some courage to push the shapes and expressions of your characters more. My course, Learn Character Design, is a comprehensive character design curriculum, over 18 hours of video learning over at learncharacterdesign.com. And this month's Beako's backpack you can get over on patreon.com/bageldenizen. It's got a Goodwin foil trading card and a Zonnet hard enamel pin. That was one that you guys were really excited about. I'm glad to bring it to you guys. You can follow me at BagelDenizen on Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and TikTok. Thank you so much for watching, and have fun creating.